Hi everyone, Stjepan here. In today's video I'm going to start a series on a very interesting opening which I've recently started playing, the Jobava London system, or the Jobava rapport system, or the Jobava attack, however you want to call it. It's a very interesting system in which white basically aims for huge complications very early on, a position that's not likely to occur often in their opponent's play, therefore something that may confuse them, but nevertheless a position that, despite being weird and rare, isn't really bad. Okay, so the Jobava London system is a system in which white plays d4 on move 1, and basically regardless of what black does, he develops with knight c3 and bishop f4. The reason why it's called the Jobava London system, or why Grandmaster Simon Williams named it that, is firstly because Badr Jobava, a great Georgian grandmaster, started playing it first. Secondly, because the bishop goes to f4, therefore it's very similar to a standard London. We are going to be looking at all responses for black in this introductory video, and I'm going to tell you all about different transpositions, different dangers that lie ahead for black, and I'm going to recommend what white should be doing against each of black's attempts. And then in detailed videos later on in the series, I'm going to be covering every system for white and for black, and I'm going to be recommending what to do for both sides. So there are a couple of main responses, d5 and knight f6, and they usually do transpose, so we are going to be focusing on them together, and they are the ones that lead to the main lines. But black is able to do many different things on move 1. So let's have a look at the main ideas first. So let's say black plays the move pawn to d5, which is very standard. White continues with knight c3, and now this is basically a Chigorin in reverse. What knight c3 does, it does three very important things. The first thing it does, it puts pressure on the d5 pawn, so it's not easy for black to continue normally in the center without losing this pawn. Secondly, it reinforces the e4 square, therefore making the move e4 possible. And if white can play e4, you will either often transpose into a mainline e4 opening, such as the Pirc or the Modern, or you will simply have a broad center with a very good position. Okay, and the third thing it does, it hinders white's c-pawn, which is very important in all queen's pawn openings. And basically, when you play d4, one of the main ideas is to play c4 and break up the center, especially when white is playing a position with pawn to d5. Also, compared to the normal London system, which is a pawn pyramid with c3, d4, e3, you cannot really play c3 yet. Okay, so that's knight c3. Now, black can respond in several different ways here. Just for as an example, I'm going to show you the main move knight f6, and now white plays the move bishop to f4. And this is now the Jobava London system. Now we can see several things here. Firstly, when you start playing an opening, you need to think about why the pieces go where they go and what are they trying to achieve. Well, bishop f4 does two things. In conjunction with the c3 knight, there's tremendous pressure on c7, and I'm going to show you some quick ways for white to win if black doesn't know this position. So c7 is immediately under pressure. You can see that knight b5 is going to be one of the main patterns here. The second thing bishop f4 does, it develops the bishop, making the e-pawn free to move to e3 without hindering the c1 bishop, and making the development quite easy for white. So white can continue e3, bishop to d3, and sort of standard London system way of development, but the knight is on c3 instead of the pawn. Now again, black can do several things here. Black can develop the bishop to f5, black can continue with pawn to e6, black can continue with pawn to c5, black can continue with pawn to c6. All of these are kind of different, and we are going to go through them one by one. Okay, now instead of d5 or knight f6, which as I said are going to transpose, black can do many other things. Okay, now we are going to go through transpositions, which are going to be a big part of the Jobava London system. And unfortunately, if you thought that the Jobava London system is a very easy way to avoid theory, you are partially correct, but there is a huge downside. If you want to avoid theory with the Jobava London system, then you're going to have to answer all the invitations to transpositions with a slightly inferior position for white or a completely equal position, meaning that you are giving up your opening advantage. I'm going to show you why I say that. So what can black do? Let's look at the move pawn to c5 first. This basically makes it impossible to play the Jobava London system. After c5, if you continue knight c3 and try to do the same thing, well, you simply have a worse position. Black is going to take cd4, and after queen d4, he's going to play knight c6. After which, fine, this can be played. This has been played by Morozevich against Kasparov. It has been played by grandmasters. The main move here is queen to h4, and after d5, e4 is a... This is just a weird opening. You're not playing the Jobava London system. This is called the Novosibirsk variation, and it has been played several times. But basically, against c5, the only move that gives white an advantage is pawn to d5. And now you're in the old Benoni. And I would advise you to look at my video on the old Benoni and also to study the old Benoni, because by far the best response to c5 is d5. So this is the first transposition you're going to be facing. Most Benoni players, if they know that you played the Jobava London system, are going to be playing pawn to c5, unfortunately. The second very common move, which players with black can choose to play on move 1, is pawn to f5, going into the Dutch. Now, you can, of course, play normal Dutch lines. You can continue with bishop f4 on move 2. But if you continue knight to c3, you are now in the Raphael variation of the Dutch, and there's no way out of it. Black can play either d5 or knight to f6. Again, watch my video on the Raphael Dutch. For example, after knight f6, by far the main move is bishop g5, and by far the best move, 1500 games. If you continue bishop f4, as I said, trying to play your Jobava London system, this is fine, but you are accepting a completely equal position in which you don't have an advantage, which on any level below, like, Grandmaster doesn't really matter that much, but you're not playing the optimal move. That being said, you can still play the Jobava London system normally, but black is going to be fine. So you're basically playing a Dutch here. After, for example, pawn to d6, pawn to e3, pawn to g6, if black wants to go for a Leningrad, this is normal. Now, there are several ways to play against this, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to make a video on my recommendations against all of these openings which are not standard, like the Dutch or the old Benoni, and I'm going to cover that. Now, another thing black could go for is he can play the move pawn to c6. Now, against pawn to c6, when you continue knight c3 and black plays pawn to d5, if you play the best move, pawn to e4, this, I hope you recognize this, this is the mainline Caro-Kann, and after d4, knight e4, black either plays bishop f5 or knight d7 or knight f6, and you have the mainline Caro-Kann. In order to avoid all of that, if you want to play your Jobava London system, you have to play bishop f4, which is fine, you're not worse, but the position is equal. The downside of the Jobava London system against these c6, d5 setups is that c7 is basically not weak anymore, because the pawn is on c6 and there's no knight b5. Let's continue. If black plays d6 or g6, for example g6, knight c3, bishop to g7, this is an invitation to the modern. You cannot really play the King's Indian anymore because your knight is on c3. By far the best move is pawn to e4, and there are a million games from here. This is the modern defense. The same goes for d6. If you continue knight c3 and he goes knight f6, there's basically nothing better than to play e4. Again, against all of these, you can choose to play bishop f4, but this is slightly inferior. For example, black goes knight b to d7, old Indian style, knight f3, and he can now go c5 already, breaking your center. You're forced to play d5, and now there are many lines from here. For example, pawn to b5, which you have to take it, and after queen a5 you have to go back. So this can get quite messy. So against all of these, I would recommend that you simply do go for the main lines and play e4. Okay, and the most irritating, at least for me, is this transposition. You play d5, he plays d5, you play your knight c3, and black simply goes e6. And when I was preparing for my game in Rabat's Open, which you can see on the channel, I was to play the Jobava London system, and I did. And my opponent usually plays the French with black against e4. And I was afraid of this. Now, if you play e4 here, this is the French. Black can play the Wiener, black can play the Classical, a million games from here. So in my prep, since I played the Tarrasch against the French, which is a knight on d2, not on c3, I was going to play bishop f4 anyway. But now, after the move bishop d6, black is simply equal. White has no advantage at all. Placing this bishop on d6 is often going to be an antidote to White's ideas in the Jobava London system. So as you can see, the Jobava London system can basically transpose to the Caro, to the French, to the Pirz, to the Modern, to the Dutch, to the Benoni. It can also transpose to the Albin counter gambit in reverse. So you play d5, he plays d5, you play knight c3, and if black goes pawn to c5 here, this is something we are going to be exploring in great detail in a separate video. There are ways to play this position calmly with bishop f4, going into the normal Jobava, or you can play the move pawn to e4. And this is now the Albin counter gambit in reverse. Now, if you haven't seen my Albin counter gambit video, please do. But basically, this is the position in reverse without the knight out, so white is playing this a tempo up. When black has this position, there's no knight on c6. So in this position, d4 is the only move, d5, knight f6, bishop g5. This is very exciting, but this is another transposition that we have to be aware of. So before I go on, I will give you two options. Play the Jobava London system if A, you are already an experienced e4 player and you are not afraid to go into the French, the Caro, the Pirz, etc. B, if you're willing to accept an equal or slightly inferior position by forcing the Jobava system setup against everything, which is fine if you're experienced, but do know that black is going to be equal. Now, let's have a look at some tricks here. Why do we play this system? Well, personally, I chose to play it because it's very exciting. It can lead to many different types of positions. It can lead to quick wins. It's easier for black to go wrong than for white to go wrong. And because it's fun. Okay, so let's have a look. So d5, this is what most players with black are going to play. Most players with black are going to play these two moves on move 2. Now, of course, this is the Veresov. We are going to be covering that next, but let's stick to the Jobava. And now, pawn to e6 is normal. You play pawn to e3. You want to play bishop d3, knight f3, castle either side, depending on what he does. And the most common move for black here is pawn to c5. Now, after pawn to c5, this is already, well, kind of bad for black. I'm going to show you why. The reason we played pawn to e3 is so that we are covering the b5 square by the bishop. So in this position after c5, this is considered already slightly better for white because you can get in the move knight b5. And after knight b5, there's huge pressure on c7, and obviously if black plays a normal move like bishop e7, you're going to win the rook. So black only has one move. Black has to play knight a6. And why is this slightly better for white? Because after the move pawn to c3, you have a London system, normal London system, but the first important point is the knight is not on d2, it's on b5, which is huge. Secondly, there's no queen b6 because the knight is in the way. There's no pressure on b2. So this is a huge improvement to the London. And it's very hard to develop this knight to bring it closer to the center because it's hanging. And it's also very hard to move this rook because the a7 pawn is hanging. So usually you're going to be reinforcing your knight with a4. You will maybe take on c5 when the bishop develops. Other than that, you want to play normal moves. For example, bishop e7 takes, bishop takes, knight f3, black castles. You can play bishop d3 here. This is an extremely harmonious position in which white has no trouble. Another way black can mess up, if you don't go for knight b5 straight away, let's say you go knight f3. Black can never safely develop this knight to c6. Okay, and let's see why. After knight c6, you simply go knight b5, and now there's no knight a6. You're basically playing knight c7 and winning this position. So if black does something stupid like knight h5, you play bishop c7 first. You can also just grab material, but bishop c7 is more precise. Bishop c7, queen e7, bishop d6 attacks the queen, queen d8, and now knight c7 check. The king goes to d7, knight e5 check. If the bishop is taken, you of course fork the king and queen, otherwise it's checkmate. So obviously this is completely winning. And after knight b5, the best move according to the engine is king d7, but now knight e5, d5, knight e8, and simply c4. And black has a lost position. The engine gives this as +3 or +4. So these are some quick wins white could get. Now, let's have a look at what happens when you play a normal game. Okay, so this is what's usual in the Jobava London system. This is what I had in my only game so far. So basically I've decided to broaden my repertoire with some weird openings, so this was one of them. And before my game, I had no idea what kind of position I was going to get. I was prepared for most of them. And this is what we got. So d5, knight c3, knight f6, bishop f4, c5, e3. And now my opponent played a6, but we transposed to the main line. Here is why black plays a6. It's to stop knight b5. The main way to play is to exchange first. So cd, ed, and a6. And now the position has calmed down, sort of, and black gets to choose the nature of the position. However, whatever black chooses, white is not worse. I'm going to show you two main plans, and then we will be covering them in detail in a separate video. So you continue knight f3, normal. Now, black has two choices here, either knight c6 or bishop g4. I believe bishop g4 is better, and it leads to very double-edged positions. White continues pawn to h3, black takes, queen takes, and after knight c6, attacking the d4 pawn, white castles queenside. And this is, in my opinion, a very nice position for white. Why? Because your attack seems to be deadlier than black's. I mean, of course, b5 and b4 is going to come, but you are not without chances either. You can play g4, g5, you can expand there, and most importantly, your king is already safe. Black's king is still on e8. Now, the second option is to play knight c6, which my opponent had played in our game. This is the position we had. The correct continuation here is knight e5, and after pawn to e6, if that's played, you can simply take here and continue with knight to a4, pretending that you've played a successful minority attack, putting a knight on c5 and putting pressure on a6 and e6. So that's not recommendable. After knight e5, what my opponent played in the game is bishop to d7. This is a much better move. And since I wasn't very familiar with this position, I took the bishop, grabbing the bishop pair, got a completely equal position and withdrew quickly. A better way to play would be bishop e2, pawn to e6, castles, queen b6 for example, knight c6, bishop c6, rook b1. And as I said, a very calm position in which neither side has that much. But white, I still believe, stands slightly better. Of course, you would like to either play c4 or you would like to play knight a4, knight c5, which is hard for the moment. So you'll have some trouble developing and finding useful plans, but black still has to castle, so the position is fine for both sides. So this is one way for black to play, with d5 and knight f6. The other main way for black to play is after d5, knight c3, to play positions with bishop to f5. Now, bishop f5 can be played immediately, or it can be played after knight f6. After knight f6, you play bishop f4, black plays bishop f5. Now, there's a very specific pattern which I would recommend, which we are going to be covering in great detail, and that's to expand with f3 g4. Or, if the knight hasn't been developed to f6 yet, that's to expand with f3 e4. So, for example, in this position, if bishop f5 is played, then you continue f3, and if black doesn't play knight f6, if he goes e6, then you simply continue e4. And this is even slightly better, in my opinion, than expanding with g4, because it's less risky. But after bishop f4 and knight f6, if bishop f5 is played, you still continue f3, black continues e6, and now we continue g4. And this is one of the most exciting positions which you can get, and bishop g6, h4. And I believe it gives great practical chances to white, but you can also go badly wrong, so it's double-edged. Of course, Badr Jobava is one of the main or best players who's played this opening. The other one is Richard Rapport. We are going to go through some of their games during the series. If you have any spare time, look at their games yourself. So here, black has to save the bishop, either h6 or h5. h6, I think, is less venomous because it doesn't force white to commit. White simply continues e3 here, and the idea is to continue bishop to d3, trading off this great defender for your f1 bishop, and after bishop d3. You can take with the c-pawn, you can also take with the queen. And now there are several ways to play. Black probably should play c5. You can now go knight g2, you can also go knight h3, which is fun, getting the knight into f4. But whatever you do, black is going to have to be extra careful, because one wrong move could mean that g5 is coming with great force and that it's going to be devastating. The best way for black to play against this is to close the position down with c4 and then to push b5 and try to attack you. So as you can see, this is going to be mad. The other way to save the bishop is h5, after which you are basically forced to play g5. The knight drops back to d7, and you still continue the same way. Now, in these sorts of positions, there are going to be several strategic patterns which we are going to be discussing. What to do when bishop d6 is played? Do you allow your pawns to be doubled? Do you take yourself? Do you play knight h3, knight f4? Do you expand with e4? What does black do? Can black play f6? Does black play c5? This is going to be a very interesting, very rich position with a lot of stuff to learn. So this position and the one we saw before without bishop f5 are going to be two main setups for black we are going to be discussing. So those are going to be two detailed videos. And in the third video, I'm going to give you my recommendation on how to face each sideline, each transposition offer from black, and when to enter some mainline openings. Okay, that's it for the intro video. We're going to continue the series tomorrow. I hope you got something from this. And as I said, I'm very excited about this opening. I'm playing it myself now, so I've been going through a lot of games, and I hope my analysis helps you. Thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned for more chess. See you later. Bye-bye. Hi everyone, Stepan here. In today's video, I'm going to continue the series on the Jobava London with what is one of the most common setups for black. A setup I haven't been talking about much in the introductory video because I believe it's sort of a separate opening, and I'm going to explain why. We are talking about the setup with d5, g6 and knight f6, sort of a Grunfeld setup for black, in which black aims to break the center with c5 and his g7 bishop, and aims to break out, basically crushing white center and gaining the initiative later on in the game. Now, let's just get into the opening. After d4, black can start with either d5 or knight f6, doesn't really matter. If he plays knight f6 though, you play knight to c3. And now if black plays g6 first, which is possible, you don't have to play bishop f4 allowing d5. Against the early g6, I would recommend playing e4 and going into the modern, or Pirts if they play d6. Now this is a perfectly viable setup. This is better than the Jobava London, but if you're not comfortable playing the Pirts or playing against the Pirts or against the modern, then by all means do play bishop f4. You are going to transpose. So after knight c3, most people are going to be playing the move d5. The idea behind d5 is you have to prevent e4. If they don't prevent e4, then, as I said, e4 is a good option. And now you continue bishop f4 and they play g6. And this is the opening I would like to talk about. Now, in this position, white has a clear plan ahead, which is something black cannot claim. And that's a very good thing. If you get this position on the board, you will most likely know what to do, because the plans are extremely obvious and the attack that's coming that white wants to play is easy to see. So the main ideas in this setup, against this setup, are to gain a quick initiative on the king side, undermine this lever that black created with the pawn on g6 by playing h4, h5. This is going to be something that you will see in all three setups I'm going to show you today. And if black allows this without blocking your plan, then it's going to be easy to open up the position. Now note that in most cases, black's next few moves are going to be bishop g7 and castle's kingside. Castling queenside in this position runs into the other part of the Jobava London system, which we looked at in the introductory video, and that's the fact that the c7 pawn and the c7 square are extremely weak. Therefore, castling queenside for black is never really an option. You can continue with the moves knight b5, c3 or c4, queen a4, and immediately there's a ton of pressure on the queen side. Coming up are also knight f3, knight e5, maybe e3, bishop b5 or bishop a6 even. I've seen stuff like that. So castling queenside, not an option. White continues with e3, which is a very flexible move, developing your bishop, also defending the b5 square. So if black is not careful, if he continues with c5, for example, then of course you can get into the position that we looked at in the introductory video after knight to b5. Queen a5 is of course not a threat, because you can play the move c3. And if they go knight a6, which is normal, you go c3 again, and you have this London system set up without the knight being stuck on d2. It's very hard for black to develop his rook because the a7 pawn is hanging and the position is great for us. So most people are going to be playing bishop g7. And here is where the position branches out. Now, you can find 3 chapters on the list here, and you can go to each chapter separately if you'd like to. This is a position in which I'm giving white 3 options, or the theory gives white 3 options. You can continue by brute force h4 straight away, which is a fine option. You can continue with knight b5, which is going to be slightly different than what we are going to see in the other 2 positions, or you can go for the so-called berry attack. Now, the berry attack is a very old opening. It got its name way before the Jobava London system, and it has been played for the last 150 years, and it has been played by some very strong players. I'm going to show you one game in that opening that's very interesting. The berry attack is a setup with the bishop on e2 and the knight on f3, in which you later on continue with your attack. So the way to go for that setup would be to play bishop to e2, for example. So those are the 3 ideas we are going to be looking at. I would like to start with knight b5 because I'm not a big fan of it, and I don't think white has a significant edge, or that white has great attacking chances against that. So let's have a look at knight b5. So the idea is clear. We want to take on c7 and win the game straight away. So black really only has one move. Black has to play knight a6 and defend. And now you can play knight f3, but more common is h3, simply preventing any knight h5 ideas and keeping your bishop. Black is going to castle. Now you play knight f3, black plays c6, evicting your knight, and that's the difference. Knight b5 with the pawn still on c7 allows black to play c6 and then reroute his knight, and this is a very common strategic plan which I would like you to remember. Either via c7 to e6, or more commonly via c7 to e8 and then to d6. And once black puts a knight on d6, then he has immense control over the e4 square, which makes it really hard for you to get your pieces into play. So You continue knight c3, of course, there's no better move. Black continues knight c7. And now there are two ways to play this position. You can either play bishop e2 or bishop to d3. There have been several games in each position. In my opinion, bishop e2 is the more logical move. Usually against fianchetto setups, you don't really want your bishop on d3 because it's blunted. And on e2, it does support h4, h5, so bishop e2 is more common. But bishop to d3 is possible, and it has been played by very strong players. There's a game Grishchuk-Cheparinov, which I'm going to show briefly. So Grishchuk played bishop to d3, Black played a5. Black can also, of course, continue with his plan straight away. Knight c8, castles, and knight to d6. And immediately you can see that even though White's pieces are sort of well placed, Black is holding on. But in the game, Cheparinov played a5, and this was a blitz game. So castles, b5, rook e1 by Grishchuk, knight e6 in this case, and bishop to e5, aiming to trade off this one if the f6 knight moves. The bishop went to a6, and now a3. And it basically became a fairly positional game where Black had this bad bishop on b7 and never really managed to get rid of it. So as you can see, the bishop made a million moves, and Grishchuk had this great knight on c5 and the other great knight on e5, and he went on to win. So, but as I said, Black did not have to go for a5. a5 is an inaccuracy. I believe that just going for straightforward central control is better. The other option in this case is bishop to e2. And this is what I like more for Black. Here I'm going to show you a game, Gareev against Romanishin, which was a slow game. And it was very interesting. White won. So Black went for knight c8. White just castled. The knight came to d6, which is the most resilient, and rook e1. I'm not really a fan of rook e1 because you're never playing e4. But the idea wasn't to play e4. The idea was to reinforce the king side with bishop f1. a5 again. And now the knight jumps into e5. The knight went to d7 to challenge the e5 square. Bishop f1. a4 gaining space on the queen side, and b3. This is a very nice move, just undermining Black's expansion. Knight b6. Looking at the c4 square. Queen to d2. f6. And Black has sort of committed too much with his pawns. If you look at White's pawn structure, it's fairly healthy. So often in these systems, Black is going to have to commit way more than White. And this is how the game went. Again, there's a great knight on c5. Again, there are trades on the a file. And as you can see, this knight on c5 is completely cemented, while in order to Black to open up his bad c8 bishop, because there's a pawn on f5, he's going to have to commit some more. So knight d5 and b6. And finally the bishop develops, and as I said, White went on to win this game. It's clear enough that White is just much better despite Black having the bishop pair, because basically both bishops are bad. So if you want a more positional approach to this position, the knight b5 is fine. However, you're not going to have those nice attacking games which we are used to seeing against this. Okay, so that's knight b5. I mean, it's a fine choice. Knight b5 is a fine choice. However, the two setups I'm about to show you, I like better, and I believe you are going to find them more fun, which is, in my opinion, one of the most important things about any opening you play. Okay, so let's look at h4. This is the main alternative to knight b5, and this is in fact the main move. So you don't develop your bishop yet, you don't develop your knight yet, you play h4. Now, if Black does nothing, which can happen, let's say Black plays c6, then you can continue with bishop e2, which is normal, or you can continue with h5. Now, h5 doesn't really work here because bishop g4, so you're kind of allowing Black to get some pressure. However, once you play f3, the bishop cannot really take on h5, so you again have a nice position and you can open up things, but you're sort of committing too much. So against c6 or any other nothing move, bishop e2 is a good way to start. You're simply reinforcing h5, and if black does nothing here, for example knight bd7, then this is already very, very dangerous, because you haven't taken away the f3 square from your knight, which is something you never want to do. The knight belongs on e5, and you're opening up the position slowly. You can continue queen d2, castles queenside, and just checkmate. So against this bishop e2 idea, black is usually going to block with h5 eventually, which is the move they usually play straight after h4. Okay, they don't have to play h5 though. Black has ideas of playing queen b6 and putting pressure on your b2 pawn, which is the weakness in all setups where white brings this bishop out too early. But I'm going to show you a pattern which I would like you to remember, which is always a good antidote against queen b6, and that's knight a4. Knight a4 just makes queen b6 look like a stupid move. Here's why. Queen a5 check is the logical continuation. c3, defending your knight by the queen and blocking the check. And now what you want to do is expand with b4 and put your knight on c5, if possible. If it's chased away with b6, then it gets here, and you have double control over e5, similar to what happened with knight a6, knight c7, knight e8, knight d6. There's a lot of arrows, but the plan is similar. So for example, knight bd7, b4, the queen drops back to d8, and now again very nice control on the queen side, very nice control over the e5 square, h5 on the cards, and things looking nice. So against h4, black has to do something. As I said, most commonly they are going to play h5 straight away, but black also has the option of playing c5 very early on, and as we know, against c5, which is a mistake in this position, if you've seen the introductory video, you will know you play knight b5, forcing knight a6, and then playing c3. Again, you have this great knight on b5 instead of on d2. And after something like castles, bishop e2, bishop to d7, you reinforce the knight with a4. If black tries something weird like c4, attacking your knight again, then you just continue h5. I mean, this is way more important than the fact that you might lose a pawn on the queen side, or that you might get doubled pawns on the b file. So that's not scary. Okay, other alternatives are castles. Castles, I believe, is just like showing a red flag to a bull. You just continue h5, and of course, this pattern you already know. If knight takes h5, then rook takes h5, and this is a dream position. The engines, let me turn on the engine. It's plus 1.6, but in reality it's way more, because, for example, c6 and bishop d3, threatening mate, f5, knight f3, coming into g4, and it's going to be over very soon. So against h4, castling is just not a good idea. So that leaves us two options, h4 and h5 and h6. If they play h6, that's fine, but h5 is better. If they go h6, you simply continue knight f3, they castle, and now you can either try knight b5, you can play knight e5, you can play queen d2, preparing to castle, you can play bishop e2, reinforcing your play on the queen side. I think knight e5 is a simple continuation, and simply going for g4 and trying to blast open the position. Sometimes you are going to be sacrificing pieces, that should be said, but h6 really isn't a big threat. So against h4, if you are looking at this to get some ideas about how to play it with the black pieces, just play h5. Now, white's attack is prevented. Of course, if he can get in g4 and open the position, that would be great. So let's try to prepare that. Knight f3, black is going to castle, bishop to e2, and this is all building up for knight e5, g4. If you can get in knight e5, g4, then great. Okay, black plays c5, and now we are at the crossroads. This is a position in which knight b5 doesn't work. And this may be complicated to understand, but I'm going to try and show you why. So Black's king is already castled, so knight c7 doesn't come with a check, which gives white plenty of time, black, excuse me, to do whatever he wants. In this position, if you play knight b5, black has an extremely good position, which is very close to winning. And you just have to know this. You have to know this. The black king is already castled. All the pieces are developed on the king side. There are no threats on c7. So what black can do is take on d4 and try to blast open the position, reinforcing e5. Because once you take on d4 and white plays knight c7, then e5 is actually a threat. So if black plays knight a6, this is close to winning for white. Of course, we play c3 and the position is great. If, however, after knight b5, black takes on d4, you simply have to recapture. You have no better moves. If you play knight c7, then it's basically game over. Knight g4, look at this pressure. If you don't take the rook now, why do you play knight c7? So let's say knight takes rook, and now e5. And this is all over. So knight e5, for example, bishop e5, knight e5, e d4, knight c4. Let's say you try to trade everything off, takes, and castles, and bishop f5, for example. This position is hard to play. You are going to lose this knight. The engines give it as -1, but I believe it's more. Firstly, there's no attack on the black king. Secondly, you may just lose a piece, and that's not good. You will be down 2 pieces for a rook. So, coming back to this position, and this is the first critical position. So after h4, h5, knight f3, castles, bishop e2, c5, which is the best move. Don't play knight b5. Don't play knight b5 because if black knows what he is doing, he's going to take on d4 and get into this position. What you do here is you play dc5. Just make sure that you are forcing black to waste some time to recapture this pawn. Black is going to play either queen a5 or knight d7. Queen a5 is better. Now you castle, your king is not in the center anymore. And now queen takes c5, knight b5, a6. He can afford this because if knight c7 here, then rook a7. And there's a tricky line here where it seems that white's knight is trapped, but you play knight b5, takes, and bishop takes a7, and rook a4. So even though h4 seems to be the most aggressive move, it's really not the most aggressive move. Because if black prevents it with h5 and then prevents a very quick c5, then you don't have knight b5 ideas early on, and you don't have an attack, because you simply don't have time for that. Which is why I believe h4 is not the ideal move. Of course, if you're playing inexperienced players, if you're playing somebody who doesn't know what to do here, if they're unfamiliar with the setup, which is very possible, you might just get a winning position if they castle early on or something. But if you're playing somebody very experienced, you will most likely get this position. And not that this position is bad for white, it's fine for white. However, it's not the type of setup we are trying to play. And there's pressure here. The knight has e4 and g4, maybe e5, e4 is coming, maybe d4 is coming, maybe this bishop comes to f5 and becomes very annoying. So there's a lot of pressure. I would say this position is equal. The engine says -0.4, so the engine likes black a bit, but it's nothing major. Which leads us to what I believe is the ideal way to play this position. Now, even though you're used to very early h4 attacks, you can delay it a bit. So here's what I think. You should do. Okay, so the berry attack is an opening in which white plays knight f3 on move 2. Now you don't have to play knight f3 on move 2. You will likely transpose, but fine. Let's just look at this position where white has already played knight f3. Imagine that on move 5 in this position, here white plays knight f3, and this is just the same. So black castles and you continue bishop to e2. It's the same position. So I recommend the setup with bishop e2, knight f3, and then going for an attack. Okay, so black castles, you play bishop to e2. Now black has several options. Black can do several different things. Most commonly they are going to play c5. That's the best move. But against anything black does, you continue knight e5. And you can see the advantage of having developed your knight to f3 early on move 5 or on move 6. You are able to jump into e5 before black plays knight c6, which is always good. And you are able to start an attack with g4 having been reinforced already. Okay, so c5 is the most common move. They can also play c6, b6, bishop g4, knight bd7, even a6. Let's look at bishop g4 first, and I'm going to show you one game in this variation. Bishop g4 is a theoretical move, but it's not really a good move, and here's why. White plays knight e5 as intended. Black basically has to trade, and after queen takes, you're ready to castle queenside. So for example, c6, h4. They can block, or they don't have to. Let's say they don't block, you castle queenside. And after knight takes e5, taking with the bishop is correct according to the engine. Taking with the pawn is more fun. But let's say you take with the bishop. Now, if there's a dream position out of the Jobava London, this is the dream position. So g4 coming, h5 coming, this bishop is about to be traded off if the knight moves, and a perfectly fine position. Other setups with early c6 just do the same thing. There's a setup with c6 where they go knight fd7 trying to trade, and after h4, knight e5, bishop e5, they go f6. But again, this is extremely committal. Moving your f pawn is extremely committal. White again has a very simple plan of playing h5, or of playing queen d2 or queen d3 and castles queenside. With c6, b5 has been supported, so black is going to have some counterplay, but it's always harder to defend when the pawn has already advanced on h4. So other setups other than c5 aren't really ideal for black. The best move is c5, and here's why I like this berry attack. You always do the same thing. You can either continue knight e5, which is the main move, or you can continue with castles and take on c5. So basically here you have to make a choice. You can either allow black to take on d4, or you can take on c5. So yeah, I believe that knight e5 is the correct way to play. The other good variation is to simply castle, in my opinion. I don't think taking on c5 is necessary here. I'm going to show you why. So knight e5, normal. Black plays knight c6 almost always if white plays knight e5, if the pawn has already been moved, and you castle, normal. Black takes on d4, which is fine, takes, and plays queen b6. Okay, now against this queen b6, since the center has been slightly weakened, of course you don't have knight a4 because queen takes on d4. So you have to be resourceful, and you take on c6. This is a position I'm going to look at in detail in a minute. Before we do that, I would like to go over why I think dc5 is not as good. So you take on c5 on move 7, and black either continues queen a5 or knight bd7. You can take on d5 here. Knight takes d5, queen takes d5, bishop takes b2. And now if you want an attack, you basically have to sacrifice material. If you play something like rook b1, well, that's too slow. Queen a5 check, or simply bishop c3 check, and your king has to move away. So you have to castle. Black grabs an exchange, and white is claiming that bishop h6 and checkmating threats are hard. So queen a5, white is claiming, sorry. Bishop h6, queen takes c5. You don't want to trade queens, obviously, so queen b3, b6 developing the bishop, rook d1. All of your pieces are well placed. You're in exchange down, but you should have enough compensation. In my opinion, white shouldn't really go for this. If you want an alternative route after knight b to d7, most people don't take the pawn on d5, most people castle. And after castles, knight takes c5, bishop to e5, trying to reinforce the d4 and the e5 squares. Again, b6, a4 gaining space on the queen side. It's not really an ideal attacking position. Black has this great bishop, black has a great knight. All of the pieces have simply come to life. I would say that black's pieces are better than white's, simply because this bishop is such a monster in comparison to this one. So after c5, I think knight e5 and castles are the best moves to go for. They are going to transpose. So on move 7, castle or play knight e5, doesn't matter, it's going to transpose. The reason why black played c5 is to trade on d4. c4 doesn't really lead anywhere, so cd, ed, knight c6, and again knight e5, and we have transposed to the same position. And black's best is queen b6, basically saving this knight. Now saving himself from doubled pawns. If you take on c6, the correct way to play is queen c6, which allows bishop b5. If they go bc6, then this is a pattern we already know. But this is an improved version of that pattern. So in normal Carlsbad structures, where black has 2 pawns on the queen side and is trying to undermine, or where white would be trying to undermine the c6 pawn, a lot of work has to be done. In this position, the goal of the minority attack has already been achieved. The c6 pawn became a backwards pawn, and it has to be fixed, and it can be done with tempo. So knight a4, queen a5, c3. Knight d7 fighting for c5, b4. The queen goes back to d8, and you now just continue your attack. This is a wonderful position. You're going to get your knight into c5. You're going to play bishop h6. You can even consider going h4, h5 anyway, despite having castled kingside. You have ideas like rook d1 or rook e1 to e3 and to h3 or to g3, and this is just perfect. The only weakness you have is the e4 square, which can be dealt with f3, and it's not really such a big weakness. If after knight c6 they take with the queen, then you get several tempi, which is also fine. Bishop b5, the queen goes to b6, you play a4, they play a6, you play a5, the queen has to drop back again, and you now just continue developing bishop to e2, bishop to f5, rook e1. Again, this is a target, and this is a target, but as soon as you play knight a4 and c3 and knight c5, c2 is no longer a target because it's on c3, and b7 has become even weaker. So again, I would say this is a very nice position. So to conclude, I think, okay, let's go back to the starting position. You play d4, they play knight f6. You play knight c3, they play d5. Bishop f4, g6, e3, bishop g7. I think positions with bishop e2 and knight f3 are just perfect. The Barry attack is a very nice opening. I don't know whether it should be called the Barry attack or the Jobava London, doesn't really matter. But basically, if black doesn't play c5, you have a great position. If they do play c5, then castles and knight e5, so castles, cd4, ed4, knight c6, knight e5, queen b6, take on c6. This is just great. If they don't play queen b6, if they, for example, try knight to d7, which has also been played, then you can just take on d5, and knight d takes e5, d takes e5, bishop e6, and again, very nice position. I don't think there are any issues here. The extra pawn is going to be lost, of course, but still fine. So g6 setups shouldn't concern you. If you want, you can play h4 like a madman. If you want, you can play the positional knight b5, But what I would recommend is simply bishop e2, knight f3, castles, knight e5, and then go for an attack 2 moves later. You're not losing out on anything. In fact, black may be confused that you didn't play h4. Okay, 3 more videos in the series. We are going to continue tomorrow. Hope you like this. Let me know what you think and stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye. Hi everyone, Stepan here. In today's video I'm going to continue the series on the Jobava London system with what I believe is the craziest variation for black to go for, or the craziest setup for black to go for, because it basically forces white to play an insane attacking game in which there's no backing down and basically one side is going to win. It's highly unlikely that it's going to be a draw. And those are setups where black plays bishop to f5, the position you can see on the board. Now, I'm going to give you an alternative to the mad continuation, to the mad pawn storm continuation, but bear in mind that it's not as good because it doesn't give white an edge and black can easily equalize. So let's get into the opening. d4, black can start with d5 or knight f6, doesn't really matter, it's going to transpose. So d5, we play knight c3. And black now has an option. Far more common is knight f6 on move 2, after which we play bishop f4 and black plays bishop f5. But it's also possible to play bishop f5 on move 2, and this is slightly different. This position is, I think, slightly more favorable for white, as I'm going to hopefully prove. And I think players with black should play the move knight f6 on move 2. The reason behind that is when you play knight f6 and then follow it up with bishop f5, you are controlling the e4 square. And this is going to be a very important square in this variation. And I'm going to try to show you what white can do to basically get his pawn to e4. If white's pawn reaches e4, then white has a broad center and a better position than in other variations. However, bishop f5 is still possible. And I'm going to show you this first before we get into the meat of the variation. So what we are going to be doing when black plays bishop f5, regardless of whether he plays it on move 2 or on move 3, we are going to chase this bishop away with a pawn storm, starting with f3. Now, if the knight hasn't been played out to f6, then we can play f3 e4. If there is a knight on f6, then we can play f3 g4, because that square is not controlled enough. Of course, the e4 square is controlled by the pawn. So when black starts with bishop f5, we play f3. Most commonly, he's going to continue with e6. I'm going to show you what to do against knight f6 as well. And now we continue e4. And this is going to be slightly unusual compared to our normal Jobava London system pawn storm, which I'm going to show you in a second. Black retreats the bishop, and now you have two options. You can either exchange the pawn and get a simple position, or you can push h4 and get a complicated position. Now, just one small digression. If black plays knight f6 instead of e6, then of course e4 has been prevented. However, you can now play g4, which is our normal continuation, and after bishop g6, you can now continue h4, which is again our normal continuation. As in normal lines, when there's a pawn on e6 already, we continue h4 and black basically has to save the bishop. So he can either play h6 or h5. In some positions, c5 is possible with a counterattack on the c3 knight. I'm going to show you that, but most commonly h6 or h5 is going to be played. And the difference here, since the pawn hasn't been committed to e6 yet, is that white has some additional options. So let's say h6. Against h6 we play the move knight h3, and black should really try to strike out at white's center. This is going to be the main downside of the setup. We have an unprotected d4 pawn, which is going to be attacked with the move c5. And now we play knight f4. This is a good continuation. The bishop doesn't really have to drop back to h7, although it can. The best move for black is knight c6, and of course if we take the bishop, which is possible, we lose our d4 pawn, so we should really start with e3, and once the bishop drops back, we play g5, and this is really nice. The pawn hasn't been committed to e6 yet, which means that this pawn is weak, so once the knight retreats, we can simply grab this pawn. So if black doesn't play with e6, he could be in trouble, lose the d5 pawn, and lose the game quickly. So most commonly, with early bishop f5, black is going to follow it up with e6. And now, as I said, we continue e4 instead of g4. Why would we weaken our king side with the move g4, which is a weakening move, when we can expand with e4? Okay, the bishop has to go to g6. And now, as I said, two options, ed or h4. Ed, I don't think gives white any advantage. The engine gives this as completely equal. Of course, black is going to recapture, and now most people play queen e2 check, forcing the bishop to e7, and there's a nice idea here, but it's not really deadly, and it doesn't really give white an edge. So we play queen e2, they play bishop e7 or knight e7, bishop e7 is more common, and now bishop to g5. This isn't really that much. Knight c6 defending and castles queenside. It's a double-edged position in which, for some reason, your pawn is on f3, your queen is on e2. The knight basically has to do this to develop. This bishop is great, we haven't chased it away, so I'm not really a big fan. So against the early bishop f5, when you expand with e4, I would recommend h4. So you basically force this bishop to do something, or you force black to do something about the bishop. Black is going to continue h5, most likely. h6 is not as good, because you can then get in bishop g5 and provoke the move f6. And after, h5 is not as good as h6, because you can get in bishop g5. But if they play h6, you can then continue g4 and g5 and undermine that. So if h6, then g4, and you're going to be opening up lines towards black's king. So basically, it's never going to be safe to castle. But against h4, h5, you get in bishop g5. And now the queen has to move. And now one of the main ideas after you expand with e4 or after you expand with g4 is to develop your bishop to d3, basically creating more trouble on this diagonal. And black should really exchange in the center, because there's a lot of tension. So d4, fe4. Note that taking the pawn is not possible because of bishop b5 check, winning the queen. So knight c6. And now knight f3, simply saving the pawn. Now again, taking is not possible because of, well, bishop b5, winning the queen. So most people, I believe, would play f6 in this position to chase the bishop away. It's probably the best move. But now there's a trick here. You can play d5, and it's not really possible to take the bishop because you gain a tempo on the queen, so he has to exchange first. The bishop was hanging, so takes. Now knight b4 attacking the queen. For example, this is a logical continuation. Queen e3 check, bishop e7, and here already black is in huge trouble. So this is one line that could give white a quick win. So you can simply castle queenside here. He cannot take your bishop. If fg5, then hg5. And basically, this knight doesn't have a square to go to. This rook only has h7. Castling queenside is highly risky. Your knight is about to get trapped or about to go to a6. So for example, if you play a6, I play a3, winning the knight. If you play castles queenside, I can take on a7. This is very tough for black to play. You have given up a piece, but this is tremendous. The engine gives this as +4. So black playing the bishop out before playing the knight out is very risky, because you get to play e4 basically for free. Okay, now, much more common is to play knight f6 on move 2. And against knight f6, we are going to have two very thematic positions which are going to branch out on move 6 for black. This is forced, the next line. So bishop f4, bishop f5, f3, e6, g4. We start chasing the bishop away, the bishop goes to g6, and we play h4. So now we have created a threat against the bishop. Black has two main options, h5 and h6. There's one option which I would like to mention because you have to know it. Now, I played the Jobava London system myself, so Not knowing this could cost you 20 minutes during the game, so that's not good. The third option, which we are going to go over briefly, is c5, seemingly giving up the bishop. However, after h5, c takes d4. You basically have to take on d4, because if you take the bishop, you have a much worse position. So take the bishop, dc3, gf7 check, king f7, bc3, and this is much better for black. Your pawn structure, it's not that it's bad, it doesn't even exist. This is just mad. You have nothing. So for example, bishop d6, trading off your good bishop, and black is perfectly fine. He's going to get the knight to c6. One day maybe knight a5, knight c4, and completely crush you. Trading off this bishops weakens the e3 square. The queen could come out to b6 or to a5, putting pressure on c3. Black could castle manually if he wishes to do so. So for example, rook e8, king g8. This is not good. So against c5, you can continue h5, but after c d4, you would have to take queen d4. And now the bishop takes on c2. And again, this is very good for black. So against c5, play e3 first. Okay, just prevent all of this. So if black exchanges, you can take back. You also have knight b5 ideas, which we saw in the introductory video. So if he does nothing, for example, bishop e7, then knight b5. And of course, queen a5 fails to c3. Eventually, he would have to play knight a6. And now again, we have this thematic knight on b5, putting pressure on a7, and a very good position. So against c5, just play e3. Now, black will have to play h5 or h6 again, for example, h6, and we have a position similar to what we are going to see in the main part of the video. But against h4, most people will have no idea that c5 is even possible. Just bear it in mind and meet it with e3. Most people are going to play one of these two moves. Okay. Now, h5 and h6 are different. I think that h6 is easier to play against because you have the option to continue g5, undermining the pawn structure, whereas after h5, g5 is only attacking the knight. One other upside of h6 is that you're not committing your pawn structure too much. After he plays h5 and you play g5, your options have been severely reduced. But with a flexible pawn storm on the king side after h6, you have a lot of options. You can play h5, you can play g5. Okay, now before we get into that, I just want to show you an alternative to the madness you are about to see, and the way to avoid f3, g4, and all of that stuff. If you don't want a complicated attacking game in which both sides could lose in a few moves, then you can play safely, but the position is going to be equal. You can continue e3. Okay, and after e3, black plays e6. You play bishop to d3, trade off the bishops. You can play cd or queen d. Both are fine. I think queen d is slightly better. c6, knight f3, bishop d6, takes, queen takes, castles. It's obvious that there is no advantage for white here. The best white has is to break the center with e4, but this, of course, is going to be perfectly equal. So if you want a safe position, don't go for f3. But if you want to win, here's what you should do. So let's look at h6 first. Black plays h6. Now, one way to play this position, or the best way to play this position, is to prepare the move e4. We don't want to commit too much on the king side before we are able to get our king to at least relative safety, and before we are able to complicate things in the center as well. What we want to do is castle queen side and then break with e4, so forcing black to do something about his king, or if it should remain in the center, creating issues. So when black plays h6, we continue e3. The plan is bishop to d3. Black has several options. I think the best one by far is to continue a6. a6 because you don't want to allow knight b5. It's as simple as that. Knight b5 is a serious threat, so if, for example, c5 is played, which is possible, then you continue h5, gaining some space, and knight b5. And this, even though the engines give it as equal, is a very pleasant position for white, as we already know from the introductory video. You have a great knight on b5, you have pressure on a7, you have space on the king side, you have space in the center. This is perfect. You can go for e4, you can go for g5, you can go for knight h3, you can go for knight e2, knight g3. There are many options here. So for example, bishop e7, knight h3, preparing g5. This is very pleasant. Black is basically in trouble from a human perspective. So against e3, I really believe black should be preventing this knight b5 idea. If he doesn't, then you know what to do. Okay, so a6 I think is best. Another alternative is bishop to d6. Now, when bishop to d6 is played, you don't have to take. You could, but you don't have to. You can play bishop to d3, which has been played a few times, allowing bishop f4, ef4, which reinforces the e5 square and brings another pawn closer to the king side. But I believe the best reaction is just knight h3. And then in the case of bishop f4, you recapture with the knight, forcing the bishop to move again. Now again, a6 should be played. Queen d2 preparing to castle, queen side, c5, castles, queen side, knight c6. And here we have the battle lines drawn. This is going to be a very common position. Black's plan is fairly simple. Black's plan is b5, c4, b4, queen a5, checkmate. Okay, so black is not without chances. White's plan is the same thing on the king side with g5. So if I was to advise black what to do, I would say don't castle too early, which is risky in itself. But if you put your king on g8, then g5 becomes a tremendous threat. Okay, so again, you can trade the bishops off. You don't have to. I think trading is a good idea here. So bishop takes, queen takes, and knight f4, forcing the bishop to move. Bishop to h7, and now you open up the center, which may seem insane. But if black gets in c4 and b5 and b4, then you're going to have far less space on the queen side and far less defensive options. So in my opinion, if you have the time, dc is a good idea. Queen c, and then you just continue with your attack. Obviously, you can see that had black castled before this had happened, then of course the knight moves, you take on h6, and it's over. So that's what I think you should do against bishop d6. If they go a6, which is the most resilient, you continue bishop d3, which is normal. Black really should trade this off. You don't want a rook on a7, you don't want a knight on a7, you don't want your pawn on g6, so bishop takes bishop. Again, it's possible to take with the pawn. I believe queen takes is better because you're going to get in e4 anyway. So queen takes d3, c5, normal, we saw all of this. Now you can play knight h3 or knight g2. I think knight g2 is better. Knight c6 and castles. When the bishop hasn't developed to d6, if you take on c5, you're giving black a tempo, so he gets to develop the bishop for free. It's less risky to take than not to take, but it's better not to take, if that makes any sense. If you want a safer game, take on c5. If you want a complicated game with optimal development, then castle queenside. And this is going to be basically the starting position of h6, if black plays the best moves. And now we are going to see plans for both sides in action. So, what black wants to do, he wants to attack on the queen side, so the logical start is the space gaining c4. The queen only has d2. And now it's possible to play b5, it's possible to play queen a5, both these moves are good. Very often you are going to be blocking this attack with b3 and knight a4. That's something you have to bear in mind. Your offensive plan is to expand in the center with e4 and cause complications before black can do something meaningful on the queen side. So let's say black starts with b5, which is fine. You can now continue g5 or e4, both are okay. I think g5 is better, simply forcing the knight to move away. Your knight on e2 is a very useful piece defending the bishop, so if g5 happens and knight h5, now that the knight has relinquished control over e4, you can continue e4. And as you can see, this is a mad position. I mean, it is a mad position. Anything could happen. No games have been played from this position here, but this is very logical and it could occur in a game. Way more common is that somebody is going to make a mistake along the way, even in Grandmaster games. So I'm trying to show you the patterns. So b4, knight a4. This is the defensive way. Queen a5, and we play b3. Of course, this is not safe. I mean, the c file could open up, or become semi-open. The center could blow open. Both kings are basically in trouble. So let's say black exchanges here. You take, at least trading off a pair of rooks. I would prefer to be white here because I think my king is safer. But then again, well, okay, it's hard to trade off the a4 knight without a light squared bishop. But if you could imagine a maneuver like this, or a maneuver like this, then yeah, you could be in trouble. So for example, takes, knight a7. And this spells disaster if white is not careful. On the other hand, maybe you open up the center, maybe you get your rook to e1, maybe you win this pawn, maybe you play g6, weakening e6, so for example here. So it's a very double-edged position. But remember that in these h6 setups, your idea is always to attack here and to attack here. So my advice is to black, don't castle. If he does, white knows what to do. If he doesn't, white still does the same thing and hopes that he gets there first. Okay, now, the second option for black, which I think is harder for white to play against, therefore I think it's better for black, is to play h5. Now, you don't want to allow hg, fg, because then you don't get in e4, so you're basically forced to play g5. Black could play knight g8 or knight h7, but they are kind of slow. Knight h7 makes no sense, and knight g8 is a good move. However, if black has the time to force bishop d6, bishop f4 and ef4, then this maneuver is okay. But you're risking a lot because white doesn't have to allow e takes f4. I'm going to show you what I mean. So if you play knight g8, a very logical plan is knight e7, knight f5, and that would be wonderful. However, if, for example, knight h3 here and bishop d6 and e3, then this is a no-brainer. Takes, knight e7, knight f5, perfect. However, if in this position white doesn't play e3, but instead plays, well, e3 and bishop takes and knight takes, for example, and knight e7, bishop d3, knight f5, e4, okay, the pawn is not protected. Let's protect the pawn somehow. I don't know. Basically, when white can play e4, this plan is not good. So against g5, most, if not all games, go knight fd7, because you don't have time for this. Because basically white is going to keep an option open to play e4, chase the knight away. Okay, now, we know what to do. We always know what to do. We play e3 and bishop d3. That's simple. Again, black's best is to play the move a6 to prevent any knight b5 ideas. Again, if something like c5 is played, we know what to do. We go knight b5 and knight a6, or okay, knight a6 and c3. So a6, bishop d3. Again, black shouldn't really allow you to double his pawns, so he takes and you take. Okay, and this is our starting position. This has been played many times, And unfortunately, black scores pretty well. The reason black scores pretty well is because it's very hard for white to find a good balance between offense and defense. I'm going to show you 3 patterns which you have to remember, which are going to make this easier for you. Now, we cannot really talk about this opening in regards to theory because there is no theory. There are plans and there are complications that could occur which you basically have to know how to respond to. What black is going to do, he's going to play c5. This is by far the best move, and there's nothing better for black but to try his attacking madness with c4, b5, queen a5, b4 and try to mate you there, because you are going to castle queenside. So white has 2 things he can do very early on which work because the black king is still in the center. The first thing, which I think you should play as soon as you are given the opportunity to play it, is g6. And it's best to play straight away. You can play knight g2. This has been played by strong players. So for example, knight g2, knight c6, and then g6. You can do that. The knight is going to e2 anyway. But playing g6 straight away is, I think, more precise. Now, black really only has one good move, and that's f6. Queen f6 is also possible, but that runs into bishop g5 and then queen f5 and then e4, so you could be in trouble. So f6, preventing, of course, taking on f7. So now you have provoked a huge weakness, and of course, with this pawn here, it's very hard for black to ever castle on the king side. Why is that? Because you could simply play rook g1, rook g5, rook h5. Okay, or you could play queen e2, e4, takes, queen h5. Okay, so it's very unlikely that black is going to be castling queenside. So you continue knight g2, black continues knight c6, you castle on the queen side. And now, black's plans are kind of hard for white to meet, but white's plans are kind of hard for black to meet. White's plan is to expand with e4 and try to cause as much trouble as possible. Black's plan is to expand on the queen side and try to checkmate. So black could go 2 different ways. One way is knight b4 very early on, forcing queen d2 and then playing knight b6, getting both knights into the danger zone, sort of. Again, you don't want to take on c5, developing the bishop for free. The other way to play is again c4 and queen d2 and b5, b4. Again, if b5 is played, this rule doesn't always apply, but you've read it a million times. When your opponent is playing on the wing, you play in the center, so e4 is a good reply, always. And for example, b5, knight a4, queen a5, b3, we saw this already. And basically with the black king here, he could get checkmated quickly, so it's common to castle on the queen side, and as you can see, anything could happen here, just anything. I'm going to show you one example game with the move h5. This is the game Kovalev versus Seturaman, played in the World Rapid Championship in 2015. So Kovalev, Vladislav versus Seturaman, 2015 World Rapid Championship. You can find it on chessgames.com, you can find it on Lichess. And this is a good example of a game that white won despite being completely lost. Okay, and I chose it to show you all the complications. So g5, knight f7, e3, a6, best moves, bishop d3, queen d3, c5, we saw this. And in this position, instead of playing g6, white played knight g2, which is still fine. Knight c6, again, I think g6 has to be played, he didn't play it. So this is a slight concession, or a slightly worse position than what we saw. Instead he castled queenside, and black just decided to mate him, queen a5. Again, it was best to continue g6 here, and after c4, queen d2, black can basically ignore g6 for the moment because his attack is too strong, so b5. And if you take on f7, that's really nothing, so e4 and b4. And now you have to get creative because you don't have knight a4 anymore. The queen is already on a5. So ed5, bc3, gf7 check. Now taking this is risky, so king f7, d6, king e6, knight c3. You've given up a piece, but this king is about to get mated. So g6 was a good attempt. Instead, white played king b1. And now black is much better. c4, queen d2 played, b5. He played b3, which is a bad move. And I think the engine gives this as, yeah, -3. This is -3 for black. Only because white didn't get in g6 in time. So his counterplay is too slow. Bishop b4 was played. Now g6. Now the engine gives it as -2.5. And in fact, you can just take on g6. There's no reason not to, but f6 was played. And now e4. And black castled. So even though white could get a quick attack, he decided to castle because, well, black seems to be quicker. Queen e1 played, e5, ed5, knight d4, bishop c3, bishop d2, rook d2, ed4, queen e6, king h8, rook d4. And they reach a very complicated position in which black is still better. After rook f to d8, saving the knight, white plays d6. And here, the engine gives the only winning move for black is f5, which I'm really struggling to understand. I think it's because it prevents rook d6 ideas, but I'm not rook d5 ideas, but I'm not really sure. Instead, cb3 was played, and now the position is equal after ab3, rook ac8. White went on to win with rook d5. Of course, there's no pawn on f5. Rook c5, knight c5, queen d5. And this pawn became too strong. The pawn on g6 is very annoying. And f5 was played here, but now just queen f5. And as I said, white went on to win the game. However, the amount of complications that arose in this game shows you that playing against h5 can be very, very risky. So c5 is going to happen. I would recommend playing g6 very early on and then castling queenside. So g6, f6, castles queenside. If they go c4 here, fine, queen a5. And now you immediately play e4. It's important to break the center straight away because he simply doesn't have time for this now. You can take and here. Queen a7 I don't think is deadly because you can move your queen away. And yeah, again, it's going to be complicated. But regardless of what happens, these games are going to be very fun, very interesting, and 99% won't be a draw. Okay, I hope you got something from this video. I hope you find this useful. Let me know what you think in the comments, and stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye. Hi everyone, Stepan here. In today's video, I'm going to continue the series on the Jobava London system with the main line for black, the best setup for black, and the most principled way for black to play. Unfortunately for us Jobava London players, black gets to choose the nature of the position, and if black knows what he's doing, he can get a safe position in which there isn't really much danger for either side, it's easy for black to equalize, or B, he can steer the game towards a very complex position in which both sides have amazing attacking chances, and in which arguably white's king is less safe, in a sense that it's easier for white to make a mistake, a little mistake, than for black to make a little mistake. So we're talking about the setup in which black plays d5, knight f6, and c5 on the first three moves. So starting out with d5 or knight f6, doesn't really matter. Knight c3, knight f6, and bishop to f4, the Jobava London system, and black plays c5 straight away. Okay, now, at the end of the video, I'm going to show you three alternatives for black on move 3 instead of c5, which I didn't want to cover in a separate video because I don't think they are as complicated to deal with for white, so I'm going to show them to you a bit later on. And now we're going to focus on this. So with the move c5, black is trying to punish white for playing knight c3, which is very logical. This is the most logical way to play for black, because white has developed the knight to c3 and is obviously unable to support his center with c3, which would be great. And basically the colors have been reversed, except white is still a tempo up, but black is the one trying to claim the center. So we have to support the center. We play the move pawn to e3. And now I'm going to show you some mistakes black could make, which are very common even on high levels, even on grandmaster levels, which could give white some easy victories. The first thing we should start with is the move knight c6, which loses straight away. So one of the main ideas of the Jobava London system is that we are piling up on the c7 square. Our knight, which has been developed to c3 very early on, can jump into the game, and in conjunction with the f4 bishop can cause a lot of trouble. Of course, this move knight c6 undefends the c7 square indirectly, because if the c7 square is defended and the knight is left on b8, black is able to play this move knight a6 defending c7. Now that the knight has been developed, obviously white plays knight b5 and you can sign the score sheets. There's nothing black can do. Black is about to lose material, he just has to choose the way to do it. So a few attempts, I mean, which you have to know, if you see this in a game, you still have to know how to convert this. If they go bishop to g4, which has been played, you can simply play f3, and after that you play knight c7. So that's not challenging. If they go king to d7, trying to prevent knight c7, then you play bishop to c7, forcing the queen away, and you continue calmly with knight f3. What you want to do is play knight e5 and just destroy black. Yeah, there's not much he can do. Let's say e6 here, you play knight e5 check, knight takes e5, d takes e5, the knight is attacked. So knight e4, for example. Now you play c4, trying to blast open the center. Let's say they try to win a piece with a6. You just go c d5, you don't really care. If a b5, then this is checkmate, bishop b5 check. If the bishop is taken, they lose the queen. If king takes c7, king to e7, sorry, then d6 check. Knight takes d6 and queen takes d6 is mate. So you are all overwhelming him. And another try is queen a5. You play c3, and then to prevent knight c7, they have to go e5, which you can simply take. If knight takes e5, then d takes e5, and again, there's not much for black here. If, for example, c4 attacking your knight, then a4 defending the knight, a6, ef6, and the position is collapsing. The best, according to the engines, is e5 straight away, which you respond to with d5. And if they attack your knight with a6, you simply go back to c3. You don't have to win straight away. This position is like +3 for white. So, for example, d4 attacking your knight, ef6, dc3, queen d8, knight d8. You can now continue bc3, and an overwhelming advantage for white once again. Gf6, bishop to d3. Pawn up, safe position, great bishops, lead in development, game over. So when you play e3 and they go knight c6, you simply go knight b5 and you win the game. I just showed you the best responses for black. Of course, black can play an even worse move. Another mistake which we have to cover after e3 is pawn to e6, which is far more common than knight c6. And this doesn't win for white straight away, but it gives white a great position with a very important pattern which you have to know, which I hope you already know from the introductory video. You play knight b5, and now since the knight is still on b8, they get to play knight a6. But now you play c3, and this is considered to be much better for white, even though the engines give it as +0.5, +0.4. Why? Because you have a London system setup which is perfectly safe, but your knight is not on d2 or on b1. The knight is already on b5, which makes it very hard for black to move the a8 rook, makes it very hard for black to get this knight into the game. Obviously, the knight has no squares. If it goes back to b8, you play knight c7 check. So you have a great piece, and black has no good pieces, basically. The only good piece is the knight on f6. So, for example, bishop to e7, h3, preventing any knight h5 ideas. black castle. So now you just continue normally, knight f3, bishop d7, whenever your knight is attacked, you want to support it with a4. And for example, c4 closing down the center. If that happens, you continue b3, undermining all of this. For example, knight e4, bc4. And this is just a good position for white. So whenever they play e6, you go knight b5 and c3, and you have a good position. So this is another mistake we have to cover. Before we get into the main lines, another mistake, albeit a slight mistake, is pawn to a6, which I've actually faced in my game, the only tournament game I played in the Jobava London so far. And the way to try and punish this is to take on c5, which I didn't do because I wasn't really sure about all the positions that could arise, and it was an important game for me, so I didn't want to risk. I just played knight f3 and we transposed to the main lines. Of course, after knight f3, the only downside is the possible c4, but I knew how to punish that. But if you take dc5 here, they can either go knight d7 or queen a5. If they go queen a5, then you take on b8, rook b8, and queen d4. And it's actually not that easy to get this pawn back. This is actually a really nice position for white. The engines give it as -0.1, which I don't really understand. Okay, now it says +0.2, but I think that after, okay, b4, queen c7, your extra pawn is not going to be lost that easily. I mean, it's a pawn up, so black has to prove something for the pawn, and I don't think black has much. So after e3, a6 immediately, I think, should be met with dc5. Now, let's get into what black should be doing. So before we get onto that, let's just repeat the opening move. So d4, d5, knight c3, knight f6, bishop f4, c5 straight away, and white plays e3. Now we covered all the mistakes. The best move for black is to break this center and then continue his development. Okay, so takes. And now a very important move in order to be able to play knight c6 is a6. And this move virtually neutralizes the main advantage of knight c3. It is a waste of time, of course. Black has spent one move on nothing. a6 is arguably nothing for black's development. Obviously, he only has the knight out. But knight b5 has been prevented, and from here on, black can continue his game. What we need to say about this structure before we get into the theory is that this is a Carlsbad structure, which you can get from the Caro-Kann, from the Queen's Gambit Declined, and ideally for white wants to play the move c3 to reinforce his center, which means that he would like to move his knight away. Usually that's going to be done via knight a4, and if you can get in knight a4, knight c5, well, c3, then your position is safe. What black wants to do, once c3 has been played, is launch a minority attack with b5, b4, break open those pawns, either isolate the d4 pawn or make the c3 pawn a backwards pawn, and then play knight c6, knight a5, knight c4. So you can watch my video on the minority attack for more ideas in this structure, but this, I know you're not used to getting into complicated theoretical structures from the Jobava London system, but it's actually very important here. And you can watch my game in the Jobava London system where black actually launched a minority attack and I prevented it successfully. You can find it in the Road to GM series. It's one of the last games. So that's going to be very important. Now, what does white do here? The first thing we do, we have to develop. So we play the move knight to f3. And this is where we branch out. This is where the position branches out. Black can either play knight c6 or bishop g4. Knight c6 is as if black were saying, I want a safe game with no risk. Bishop g4 is as if black were saying, I want to crush you, and I believe that I have better attacking chances. So we're going to cover both. Let's start with knight c6, the safe move first. Knight c6. This is what was played in my game. So what you do against knight c6 is knight e5. Obviously, taking this knight is a bad idea because you recapture with the pawn and you can get a great position. So black has three options, either bishop d7, as was played by my opponent, e6, or bishop f5, which is inferior. Bishop f5 we have to deal with first. Some people are going to play this because it seems reasonable to get your bishop out before you play e6, but that's actually a mistake. Bishop f5 you can meet with g4, and the exchanges that are about to happen favor white. So knight takes e5, d takes e5, knight takes g4, and you can simply continue h3. Once the knight drops back to h6, you can either take on d5, which is fine, or you can play queen d4, which the engines like better, but I think for humans this is fine. So queen d5, knight d5, obviously bishop c2 is not possible because of knight c7, so black castles, white castles. And the material is even. I would say white's king is slightly safer because it does have 3 pawns in front of it. White structure on the king side is somewhat ruined, but he has a lead in development. The only piece that has to come out is the bishop on f1, and once this bishop gets to g2, it's going to become a very good position. So, and also white always has the option to take on h6, ruin the pawn structure, give up the bishop pair, and try to play on from there. So bishop f5 is, I think, slightly better for white, considering that knight c6 is equal. Okay, so knight e5. Let's say they play bishop to d7. Now, in my game, I actually made a mistake here because I wasn't really sure what to do. I took on d7, and after knight d7, queen d7, I played bishop e2, I think e6, castles, bishop d6. We exchanged here, and I think I played knight a4 straight away. So obviously I want to play c3 and knight c5, and the position was just equal, perfectly equal. Another thing I should mention about this structure is that black would like to break with e5 at some point if it's favorable. But against bishop d7, taking this bishop is not optimal. It's optimal to just develop. So bishop e2, e6, castles. If they go queen b6, that's not something you should be worried about. You can just take on c6, bishop c6 and rook b1. This is fine. Let's say bishop to e7, rook to e1, black castles. You play h3. They play, for example, rook c8, bishop to d3, a more active square, rook f d8, knight e2, and you want to play c3. Get your structure, make your structure safer. So for example, bishop b5 is a good move, I think, trading off these bishops, takes, and c3. And now black either plays for e5 or he plays for b5, b4. As I said, I think the minority attack is a safer way to play for black. White gets to challenge the e4 square, which is a good thing with knight g3. But in reality, this position should end in a draw with best play from both sides. And what's more important for us, people who are not 25, 2600, it's hard to make mistakes, which is good for black if he wants to neutralize this annoying opening. So that's bishop to d7. Another way to play is simply e6, which I think is inferior, and I think it actually gives white an advantage. So against this, if they go e6, you can just take. And after bc6, you just go knight a4. And now, obviously, this is a bad structure for black. If you can gain control over c5, put your knight there, then you have a simple game plan. Also, black at some point has to play a5 and bishop a6 to trade off his bad bishop, because e5 is not happening anytime soon. Now, best for black is bishop to d6, trading off these bishops, weakening the c5 square. White can continue bishop to d3, black finally castles, white finally castles, let's say rook e8, and e5 has to be prepared. Rook e1, a5, trying to play bishop a6. Then we can continue b3, and when they go bishop a6, you can actually trade that off, gain a tempo on the rook goes back. And now black has to play e5, otherwise white is simply better, so e5 is going to be prepared and played. Trading off the knight with knight d7 is okay, I think, but I think it's better. For example, white plays rook c1. I think it's better to just play e5 straight away, and you get something like this. And c4, white wants to attack this pawn structure. This pawn, yeah, okay. He doesn't have to advance straight away. Maybe rook d8, okay, and maybe h3, d4, knight d3, and perfectly equal. Arguably, black has more weaknesses than white, but this could have turned out differently. This is just an example. But what I wanted to show you with knight c6 is that black gets a very comfortable equal position. My opponent, after our game, I said, well, why do you go for that boring line? And she said, well, I prepared something positional against this, and she chose to play something safe. Now let's get into the other option, which black should play if he wants to play for the win, and that's bishop to g4. Now against this, white has one option only, and that's to play h3, to ask this bishop whether it wants to give itself up on f3 or not. Black should take. If black doesn't take, then g4, bishop g6 and knight e5, and white has an advantage. You're going to castle queenside anyway, so you don't really mind these pawns advancing. You want to be advancing them anyway. So for example, knight c6, h4, knight e5, d5, d4, h5, for example, dc3, hg6. You can see that white has all the time in the world and that white is simply better. The engines say white is winning. That might be overstating it, but I would say white is more comfortable. For example, something like this. So after h3, black really should take. So takes, queen takes, knight c6, and this is all basically forced. Knight c6, attacking d4, castles. And after e6, we have our starting position. Now, I've analyzed this position a lot because it's highly likely it could occur in one of my games. And basically, if you go wrong at any point during the next 5 or 6 moves, you're going to be worse. You're going to be much worse. So one thing we can see is that the pawn structure for black resembles some weird Sicilian, where rook c8, rook c3 is dangerous. In conjunction with queen a5, knight b4, or bishop b4, this could become deadly. So black has one plan alone. Push the b pawn, get the rook to c8, get the queen to a5, and try to mate white before white mates black. White only has one option here, and that's to advance on the king side as much as possible to force black's hand, either for black to castle or to weaken himself on the king side. Now, since the white king has been committed to the queen side and black king hasn't been committed yet, I think white stands worse from a practical perspective. And let's look at that. So white has to play quickly, black has to play quickly. So g4, bishop d6. You don't want to trade the pieces off, so bishop to e3. And now, what I think is best for black is queen a5 straight away. That's a very good attacking move, and there's a very specific reason behind this move. Now, white would like to put his bishop on d3. That's obviously the most active square. However, once you put your bishop on d3, you're blocking the communication between the queen and between the c3 square, which usually white wants to play king b1, bishop c1 to defend everything, and then the queen defends the knight, so any rook c8, rook c3 is not dangerous. If you play bishop to d3, then rook c3 is dangerous, because even if you play king b1, bishop c1, you could end up being in trouble. I'm going to show you one example. Let's say king b1 is played, which is a sound move. A rook c8, and let's say you play bishop to d3. Okay, black plays knight b4, and are you gonna give your bishop up? what are you going to do? Are you going to allow rook c3, bc3, and queen a2? No, you're not. So let's say you play a3, trying to say, well, if you take on c3, I'm fine. This position is very close to losing for white, and it's very easy to lose it from here on. So here's a pattern you must know. Rook takes knight, a takes, excuse me, rook takes knight, a takes b4, and now bishop takes b4. Now, if you take the rook, it's mate in 3, so takes, and that's it. No way to avoid mate. You can see that the fact that the bishop is not on c1 and the fact that the queen is not communicating with the c3 square is going to cost white dearly. So after a3, rook takes c3, a takes b4, bishop takes b4. Let's say you don't take the rook. Let's say you don't want to get mated. Let's say you continue g5. Then knight d7, let's say h4, let's say rook c6, saving the rook. And now what do? The engines give c4 as the best move, which I don't like c4. Obviously white has no attack because the black king is still on e8. It could go to d8, c7, b8, it could castle king side, it doesn't have to do anything. And obviously black is the one with the pressure. So after queen a5, which I think is the best way to play, you could also start with rook c8. White has to be extra careful. So what I think white should do is white should seek immediate play on the king side without wasting any time. So you start with g5. This has to be the best move. The engines also give it as the best move, but practically you're not giving black time to continue with his ideas. Also, you're not blocking your queen. This is very important. Be very, very scared of playing bishop d3. So knight d7 and now king b1. And our setup is going to be king b1, bishop c1. This bishop is better on c1 than on e3 for two reasons. Firstly, the queen defends the knight. Secondly, the bishop defends the b2 square and the a1 square indirectly. So you have a lot more defensive resources. So let's say rook c8 again, bishop c1. Everything is safe. Now obviously, if they play knight b4, that simply doesn't work. You can now play a3, and if they go rook c3, you can just take. So everything is safe. Even if you took with the pawn, even if you, took the knight here, and then bishop takes, and then here, and then bishop here, it's still not mate. It's not mate. So you can see that the bishop on c1 does a great job. So bishop c1. Let's say black continues b5. And now again, we have to play quickly. These positions are very tricky, and we have to play quickly. So h4. May not seem like much, but your pawn coming to h5 is going to be a big deal. b4, the knight drops back to e2, fine. Let's say queen c7, putting pressure on c2. Let's say bishop to h3, let's say castles, h5, knight e7, trying to defend. And in these positions, when the knight has dropped back to e2, you don't have to be afraid of c3. Because if they don't take, you're going to take. If they do take, you take with the knight. And even though the b file has opened, I would say that white has better chances here. So these are example positions which could happen from here on, from our starting position. Just remember not to block your queen. Remember to play king b1, bishop c1. That's very safe. And then think about attacking. Okay, as promised, I'm going to show you a few alternatives on move 3 for black, which don't really fall into the category of this video, but you still have to know them. So what if black doesn't play c5 and doesn't play bishop f5, which we looked at in the last video? What if black tries to deviate? Well, there are a few ways to deviate. One of them is definitely e6, which is the second most popular way to play against the Jobava, but I don't think you have to spend too much time on this. Your play is going to come very naturally, and it's easy to find moves against this. Again, you continue with e3. They can now go bishop b4 or bishop d6. If bishop b4, then simply bishop d3. You're not afraid of bishop c3, definitely. c5. And since the bishop has already been developed, it's always nice to gain a tempo on that bishop, so you take dc5. If the bishop takes, black has wasted the move. Otherwise, he has to take with the knight. Also, you don't really want to allow c4. So dc5, knight bd7, knight e2, knight c5, maybe a3, knight d3, queen d3. This is fine. This is just a nice position. Castle's queen side, castle's king side. And now there have been a few games from this position. Jobava won a nice game against a 2400 player in 2014. You can find that game. He played bishop g5 here. I think it may be more precise to break out with e4 straight away. Obviously, this position can be reached by anybody. It's not hard to find these moves. You would have found them over the board. So bishop b4, not a problem. If they go bishop d6, I would recommend a line that makes it harder for black to equalize. Now, of course, you can play knight f3, you can play bishop d3, you can play bishop g3, you can play bishop takes d6. I think the best way to play is actually queen f3. And this gets your queen close to the danger zone. It prevents bishop takes bishop, pawn takes bishop, doubling your pawns. It prevents knight e4, and it prepares castle's queen side, which is what you want to do. So castle's king side, castle's queen side. For example, knight bd7. And from here on, you just continue bishop d3, you can continue g4, you can continue h4. Very natural attacking position. So that's e6, e3, and bishop here or here really shouldn't be too much trouble. Let's look at another move. What if black plays c6, simply playing against knight b5 and leaving the option for this bishop to develop? Well, you go e3, and if they go bishop f5, which is the most natural move, then watch the previous video, f3, g4, boom. Okay, so that's not a problem. And if they don't play bishop f5, what else do they do? Bishop d7 makes no sense, knight bd7 makes no sense, e6 makes no sense because you already played c6. So this is going to transpose to the previous video. And another move is a6 before c5, which is okay. Now you go e3, and if they go c5 here, you can simply take dc5, which we already know is fine, and that's okay. If against a6, e3 they go e6, then even though the bishop hasn't been developed yet, since it's been blocked, you can go g4. And this can become very interesting. I wouldn't like to spend too much time on this, but for example, c5, g5, knight fd7, knight f3, knight c6, this is a very nice position. Again, you can continue queen d2, castle's queen side, maybe bishop h3, maybe h4, h5, no problems. So this c5 setup is best for black, and after e3 takes a6, knight f3, bishop g4 is going to lead to positions where white is going to have to be extra careful. I would recommend detailed analysis of those positions. I would recommend that you challenge yourself and try to win those positions against your friends or against an engine, and just try to get a feel for what black can do. When I started preparing for this, I actually played the highest rated stockfish and got crushed, so I got to learn the attacking patterns black can use, and they are amazing. Okay, thank you for watching, hope you liked the video, and let me know what you think. Stay tuned for more chess, bye bye. Hi everyone, Stjepan here. In this video I'm going to cover black's attempts to avoid the Jobava London system, and this is the last video in the series. I wasn't sure whether I should make it or not, but I think it's good to have all the silence in one place and all the deviations black would try to go for in one place. And I'm going to show you when you can force the Jobava, when you basically have no choice but to play the opening black chose, which is a few options only. So when you play the Jobava London system, you want to play the Jobava London system, and you're probably not comfortable entering mainline d4 openings or mainline e4 openings, especially if you're a d4 player, then playing the French or the Caro or something else may not be up your sleeve. So one thing I'm going to say, it's great to have a versatile opening repertoire if you want to include the Jobava. Especially it's great to be an e4 player as well, because many transpositions, depending on the player, sometimes you'll want to enter an e4 opening. Okay, so we play the move pawn to d4, and what we want to achieve is our Jobava London, which is this system. And we play bishop f4, and now we want to play our thing. Now, what can black do about that? Firstly, let's cover one option against which we have no choice but to enter what black wants to play, and that's c5 on move 1. Unfortunately, against this, we basically have nothing better but to go for the old Benoni. You could try avoiding the old Benoni by taking on c5, by playing e3 or c3, by playing e4, by playing knight f3, and all of those options are inferior to the main line, and they also don't steer the game towards the Jobava London system. Therefore, I would just recommend the move d5, and you can watch my video on the old Benoni if you need more information. Black, of course, has many moves here. He can play e5, which is the trickiest. He can play knight f6, he can play d6, he can play g6 or e6 going into the modern Benoni. He can also play f5. So there's a ton of theory here, so watch the video on the old Benoni. Unfortunately, there is absolutely nothing a Jobava London player can do about c5. So just deal with it. If you want to play the Jobava London system, you have to be prepared for this. Now, what if black plays f5 on move 1? Here we can get something similar to what we are trying to play, and it's not inferior to main lines against the Dutch, playing g3 or knight f3 or c4, which are basically the three best moves. We can play knight c3, and now this is the Raphael variation of the Dutch. Again, you can watch the video on that if you need more information, and you definitely will need more information. Black has two main moves here, either d5 or knight f6, and against both we can play our system. It's not going to be identical to what we usually play, but you are going to be more comfortable playing this than going into the main line Raphael. So, for example, knight f6, we play bishop f4. Now, bishop f4 has been played maybe 20 times from this position. Bishop g5 is by far the best move. And if you want to play optimal moves, I would recommend learning the main line against knight f6 in the Raphael variation. Again, there's a video on that in the Dutch playlist, but let's say we stick to bishop f4. Black plays e6, we play e3, and now the best move for black is bishop to b4, which is kind of exploiting our setup. And if we go bishop d3, then black can simply double our pawns and castle. So we need to deviate from the system slightly by playing knight e2. Black castles, we play a3, the bishop drops back. And now there's one very important pattern to know here. In positions where black hasn't played the move d5, we can often get in d5. The advantage of this system over mainline systems against the Dutch is that here our knight is on c3, so it's supporting d5, and we can simply play d5 here. If that's taken, knight takes, and we have a very good position. The center has blown open in our favor, and the other knight can come to c3. So black probably should continue with the move d6, stopping any further advances, and now we can trade, and jump into d4, and this is a very nice position for white. So against f5 and knight f6, this move d5 is crucial. If they go d5 on move 2, this is slightly less good. For white, I think it's more resilient for black, but we can create our setup. We go bishop f4, they go knight f6 or c6 or a6 or e6. There are many options. Probably they are going to play all of those moves eventually. So let's say knight f6, we go e3, and this is the setup we want. So now at least you're comfortable with white side of the board. Okay, e6, and from here on, black could go for the stone wall with c6, which is not such a great option because black usually wants the knight on c6 or he wants to play c5. Of course, in the stonewall systems, you can watch the video on the stonewall, this bishop is a bad piece. So maybe c6, maybe not, you don't know. So knight f3. From white, your moves are normal. There's nothing strange about your moves. Black can either choose bishop d6 or bishop e7. Against bishop d6, I would recommend not trading this bishop, but playing bishop to d3, and you're basically not afraid of bishop f4, because then you will have immense control over the e5 square, and also it's going to be easier to do something about knight e4 jumps, such as f3 or something. So castles, if they go bishop d6, let's say knight c6 here, you go knight e2, this is an important maneuver you have to remember, and from here on you want to play the move c4 and attack on the king side. Sometimes crazy ideas like g4 are possible, usually prepared with knight e5. And if they don't go bishop d6, excuse me, not here. If they go bishop e7 instead, then you do the same thing. Bishop d3, black castles, you castle. For example, bishop to d7, knight e2. Again, you want to play c4. A very common maneuver is bishop e8, bishop h5. So let's say bishop e8, c4 breaking the center. c6 is not so good because you have this annoying queen b3, which is really not easy to respond to. So most players are going to play knight c6. And here, taking on d5 is, well, would improve black's pawn structure, so don't take on d5. Instead, go for knight e5, bishop g5, maybe knight g3 in the future, maybe g4 again in the future, maybe king h1, rook g1 in the future. So this is a setup that you should be comfortable playing. Your pieces have more space, you're controlling more squares than black, and all of a sudden black has the stupid knight on c6. So if they go f5 on move 1, that's just something you have to deal with. Again, if you want to play the mainline Raphael variation of the Dutch, watch the video on that. I would recommend it, but if you want to stick to this one system, then you can do what I just showed you. One interesting option for black is going for the Pirc or the modern. So for example, black plays d6, you go knight c3, and now black plays knight f6. And of course, if you want to play the mainline Pirc, if you are an e4 player, or if you know how to play against the Pirc, then by all means e4, and from here on there have been a million games, and just do that. If you don't know e4 openings, then if you try to go for bishop f4, this is tricky. Why tricky? Well, against bishop f4 in this position, black can go for a sort of weird Benko gambit, where he gives up the b5 pawn. You have no way to avoid it if you go bishop f4. So I'm going to show you the system black should be playing. So knight bd7, you go knight f3, going for your normal setup, and now c5, trying to break your center. In this position, if e3 is played, which can be played, then black manages to trade off this pawn for this pawn, which is not a good trade-off later on if you try to castle queenside, for example. Takes. If you try to castle queenside, then there will be rook c8 and rook takes c3 ideas, e5 is coming also, and your center will be broken to bits. So against c5, the best move by far is d5, and this is the optimal way to play. However, in this position, black has the Benko idea of b5, and you have to take it. Once you take it, queen a5, knight c3, and rook b8. And black is slightly worse, but it's not really clear why. After rook b2, e4, now we are in the normal Benko / Benoni type of position, maybe queen c1, rook b7, or rook b8, and a4. Black has great play on the queen side. This bishop is coming to g7. And you can see that this is not comfortable. This is not a great way for white to play. I think this is very tricky. So you're not playing the Jobava London system because black simply doesn't allow it. You're not playing an opening you're comfortable with, most probably because nobody could be comfortable with this. So against d6, I really would recommend going for the mainline Pirc. And as I said in the intro video, the Jobava London system is not a simple opening. It's usually played either by very lazy players that don't know any theory, or by grandmasters that know everything, so they will have no issue transposing into stuff like this. Okay, If they go d5 on move 1 and we continue with our move knight c3, which is normal, then black has several options. So the first option we have to cover is the invitation to the Caro-Kann. What if they go c6? Well, if this position, in this position, if you continue e4, then hopefully you recognize this position. Mainline Caro-Kann, d4, knight e4, bishop f5, or d4, knight e4, knight f6, or d4, knight e4, knight d7. And you are playing the classical variation of the Caro and, well, deal with it. So if they go c6, there's actually an easy way to get the Jobava London system. Now, c6 is a meaningful move. It's not a waste of time. If I were facing the Jobava London today, I would actually play c6. Because if they go e4, I'm a Caro-Kann player, so I have no problem playing the Caro-Kann. And if they go bishop f4, trying to play the Jobava London, I've already played the move c6, so there are no knight b5 ideas. You may argue that c6 is slow, but it's actually a very useful move. So bishop f4, they continue knight f6, we go e3, and now black could play g6. Against this, I would recommend the immediate h4, but far more common is bishop f5, and against this we know what to do. You can watch the video in the Jobava London series about what to do against bishop f5 setups. The fact that c6 has been played doesn't really matter. You still go f3, e6, g4, bishop g6, h4, and now one of these two moves is possible. So against the invitation to the Caro-Kann, we have no issue with that. You can just play your normal stuff. The next thing I would like to cover is the invitation to the French. If they go e6 and we go e4, then whenever classical, a million games, probably 100,000 games from this position, and you are in the main line of the French defense. So if they go e6 and you are not an e4 player that plays knight c3 against the French, like me, I play knight d2 against the French. So I would never go e4 here because I have no idea what to do. And this is actually in my only tournament game in the Jobava. My opponent plays the French defense against e4, and I was really concerned about this. So I'd prepared for this. And I was going to go for the Jobava London setup with bishop f4. Now, there's a slight downside to this compared to other systems. The bishop is already open, so black has the very annoying option to play bishop d6 straight away. If they go knight f6 and you go e3 and they go bishop d6 here, you are now in the d5 knight f6 e6 line that I covered in the previous video. You can see it in the series. This is easy for black to play, easy for white to play. Black usually equalizes, but let's face it, you put a knight on c3, so what more do you want? But the most annoying is bishop d6 straight away. And now, putting the bishop back is a bad move. You're just wasting too much time. Playing e3 in such a flexible position for black wouldn't really be good, because here, and the immediate c5 just has to be good, so black would break your center. So against bishop d6, it's actually just best to take. And this position is perfectly equal, unfortunately. And there's nothing we can do about that. Here, one game has been played, ended in a draw. Black took c d6. It's also possible to take with the queen. Regardless of how black recaptures, I believe that he is perfectly fine. But yeah, you play on from here. I mean, the game that ended in a draw went like this: e4, d4, knight e4, knight f6, bishop e5. And yeah, no issues for either side, really, unfortunately. Okay, so that's the invitation to the French, but this is still the best we can get, unless we want to play the optimal move e4 and get into the French. One move I would like to face, I would like to emphasize, is the move c5. And c5 is probably the trickiest move you can be facing. I'm going to show you why. If they go c5 here, you have two options. You can play the Irish Gambit, which Grandmaster Simon Williams recommends against this, and that's the move e4. And this is basically the Albin counter gambit with a tempo up. So if this position was reversed, black wouldn't have a knight on c6, and we already have a knight on c3. So we are a tempo up compared to the normal Albin counter gambit. Unfortunately, this is a messy position. So I'll give you a choice. You can either do this, or you can do what I would do, and that's just go for the normal Jobava. In this position, there's only one logical move, and that's d4. If c d4, then queen d4, d4, queen d8, king d8. You can take on e4 straight away, bishop f5, bishop d3. And this is slightly better, because we have a 3-2 on the queen side. The black's king cannot castle. Other options such as knight f6 also fail. We just take e d5, knight d5, knight f3 for example, knight c6 and bishop b5, and this is huge pressure on black. We have great development, all the pieces are on natural squares. So against e4 black really should take. And unfortunately for us, we now have a messy position which is not clear at all. d5 is the only move to go for an advantage, knight f6. And now you can play bishop f4, but bishop g5 is way more common. Knight bd7, knight g2, you want to do this to recapture your pawn. h6, bishop e3, knight b6, triple attacking this guy. Bishop takes c5, knight takes d5, knight takes, and this is just slightly better for black. Your pieces are awkward, you're still a pawn down. I mean, there are some aggressive ways to play this position, and there are ways for black to go wrong, but honestly, I don't think you should be doing that. But if you want to learn that, go ahead. So against c5, we don't have to go in for all of that crazy stuff for the Irish Gambit. We can just play bishop f4 and calm position. Calm position. If they take on d4, there's really no issue, because they still have to waste time on knight f6. This pawn is, or e6, this pawn is attacked, so there's no tempo gaining takes and knight c6, because we can just take. This is a thing in the Chigorin and the Albin, so this is fine. So against bishop f4, they can either transpose to the main line with knight f6, e3, and for this, watch the previous video in the series, and this is perfectly fine for white. I see no reason to play e4 if you can get this position, when most people are going to be playing knight f6 on move 3. And the other option is for black to go knight c6. Still, no issue. We play e3, cd, ed, and bishop f5, and now it's not easy to go for this pawn storm, which we saw 2 videos ago, but you can simply play bishop d3 and the position is fine. No issues here. Bishop d3, bishop takes d3, queen takes d3, maybe e6, knight f3, bishop d6. You can now go knight e2, knight f6 castles, and white should be slightly better here. You have a Carlsbad structure and black is far off from going for any sort of minority attack. I like this position. I've played it a lot with both colors actually, and I enjoy playing it. So I see no reason to go for e4. Okay, that was c5. If they go g6, trying to play a sort of fianchetto system against the Jobava London system, you can go bishop f4 and watch the first video in the series for that position. But there's actually a better way to play, and I would recommend deviating from the normal system here. If they go g6, you can just get in e4. Use the fact that your knight has already been developed to c3 and just break the center. d4, knight e4, bishop g7, knight f3, knight f6. You can just take that, bishop takes, and just go c3. And your idea is you want to play bishop c4, queen b3, castle kingside, play rook e1, maybe knight g5, maybe knight e5, pressure here. This is a comfortable position. It's not really easy for black to develop, because any bishop g4 is met with queen b3 anyway. So against g6 I would recommend this, and there should be no issues here. That being said, you can play bishop f4. It's not a bad move. And after bishop g7, you just go e3 and play the same thing. So if you don't want to learn, you can go for this and just go for h4 and boom. Okay, one more thing I would like to mention. If against knight c3 they go knight c6, trying to play the symmetrical Jobava London thing, then you go bishop f4, go for your own thing. If they go bishop f5, trying to copy you further, there's a very important thing you have to do here. Before we get into that, what if they play e6? If they play e6, you just go e3, and for some reason this knight is on c6 and this bishop is blocked. So you definitely have a small advantage here because your bishop is better than black's bishop. That's as simple as that. There's no pressure on c2. There's no knight b4. There is knight b5, however. So bishop f5 is definitely logical. And against bishop f5, you can play e3 and then f3 and then this, but the best move is e4. And this is very hard for black to meet. This isn't really a gambit. I mean, you're gonna get your material back. Now, what are his options? If they go ed, then you go d5, and after knight b4, which is a huge mistake, you can go a3 and knight a6, and simply queen d4. You're winning this pawn, there's pressure here. You're gonna castle queenside, but wonderful position. If they play the best move, which is going back with knight b8, then why do you do that? You can still go queen d4 and win your pawn back. You can also play knight e2, knight g3 and win your pawn back. So, okay, the engine gives this as plus 1.6. The engine wants to play g4. I wouldn't recommend playing that crazy. I would recommend just normal moves like queen d4, which are still very hard to meet. So that's if they take with the pawn. If they take with the bishop, you can just take, they take, and you go d5 again. And now you have the bishop pair, you're going to win your pawn back, and you have space in the center. So knight b4 here, you just go c4. Everything's defended, everything's fine. This is a great position. I mean, I would just enjoy playing this. Of course, don't go queen d4 here, because you're going to lose your queen. So, to conclude, the only opening we definitely cannot avoid is the old Benoni, and unfortunately you have to play it. The other very tricky way to play for the Jobava London system player is f5, because now there's no avoiding the Raphael variation of the Dutch, and against knight f6 playing bishop f4 is definitely an inferior move. So if you want to play the Jobava London, I would recommend that you learn how to play against these two openings. The third opening I would highlight as crucial is pawn to d6, knight c3, knight f6. I would recommend playing the Pirts, playing against the Pirts. And if you want to go bishop f4, then be prepared for Benko/Benoni weird positions. So those three, you have to learn how to face. Anything other than that, you'll be playing something that we covered in the previous 3 videos. Okay, good luck. I hope you score well with the Jobava. If you have any questions, and I know this was complicated and a lot of stuff, just ask in the comments below. And stay tuned for more chess. See you later. Bye-bye.